All right. While everyone is trickling in, I'm going to go ahead and start by saying thank you to everyone joining us today from around the country and the world. I'm Alexander McCobin, the CEO here at Conscious Capitalism Inc. And on behalf of the entire Conscious Capitalism team, I want to say thank you for taking the time to learn and grow in community with us today. I am incredibly excited to be talking with Paul Rice, the founder and CEO of Fairtrade USA, to discuss how to drive systemic change and build innovative business models for responsible business. But before I get to Paul, as many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of business, as well as a movement of business leaders committed to improving the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism Inc. is the nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement by creating learning opportunities like today's session and building systems of support for practicing conscious capitalism, such as through our Senior Leader Network membership. Several times a month, we offer these virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and the business practices of those in our network. And on a weekly basis, through our Senior Leader Network, we have incredible programming to help business leaders like yourself go further on your conscious capitalist journey in community and connection with other business leaders like Paul and other incredible people. Now, today's gathering will run for about 45 minutes. Paul and I are going to be in conversation in the beginning, but we're going to transition over to Q&A from you as we get through this session. So at any point, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to try to get through as many of your questions as we can during our time together. And if you have any technical questions or issues during this, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org so that we can address them right away. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Rice. Since launching the Fairtrade certified label in 1998, Paul has helped establish fair trade as one of the fastest growing segments of the food and apparel industries. To date, Fairtrade USA has partnered with over 1,400 leading companies, including Green Mountain, Nespresso, Whole Foods, Costco, Kroger, Chobani, and Target. Paul has been named Ethical Corporation's 2019 Business Leader of the Year and is a 4-time winner of Fast Company magazine's Social Capitalist of the Year. Paul, I have just loved our friendship growing over the years, and I'm so grateful for you taking time to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. It's so great to be here with our community. I'm really excited about the conversation.
So let's dive right into it. You know, in 2020, consumer recognition of the fair trade certified label hit 63%, and US retail sales of fair trade products grew to $8 billion, which shows the significant impact of the fair trade movement. For those here today that might not be as familiar with your personal story or Fairtrade USA's story, was wondering if you could start by just sharing a bit about how all of this got started.
Absolutely. Alexander, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here by going off script because my heart is heavy today, and I'm trying to show up my whole authentic self in every moment. So I want to share something with you before we launch into today's topic, and that is that every movement has its fallen heroes, and the fair trade movement has just lost one of its best and brightest. A woman named Maya Spall Johnson, who passed away a few days ago at the age of 42. She was with Fairtrade USA for the last 18 years. She helped us build so many of our programs. She was our leading intrapreneur, helping us incubate our tea program and our fish program and our factory program. And she was truly a light among us. And she leaves such a legacy of impact for so many farmers and workers around the world. And my heart is heavy. And I I wanted to share that with you and with our community today, and ask our community to pray uh, for Maya and her family, for her two little kids. Um, I know that we are in a community of love and light, and so I'm calling on our community to hold Maya and her family in your thoughts and prayers today.
Paul, I am so sorry to hear that and really appreciate you being so open with us about that. And why don't we take a moment of silence in her memory and in her honor? Really, thank you, Paul.
Thank you, family. Thank you. Let's steer this conversation into the light, which is where she would want us to be. So fair trade is a remarkable global community, like this conscious capitalist community. The fair traders subscribe to the philosophy that business can and must be a force for good in the world, and they're making it so. Sound familiar? So fair trade got started in Europe 60 years ago. People who wanted to help farmers and workers around the world, and who coined the slogan, trade, not aid. And this notion that through business and through more equitable terms of trade, buying farmers' harvests at a better price, we could help lift communities out of poverty through the market. And I love that philosophy. I first learned about fair trade when I was living in Nicaragua. Alexander, you know this about me. I went off to Nicaragua at the tender age of 22 to work with farmers. My dream was to work with farmers and to be a part of sustainable agriculture. And I did that for 11 years. And it was while I was in Nicaragua that I heard, very much by accident, about this this movement in Europe called fair trade, and this notion that we could help improve the lives of hardworking farmers and help them protect their environment through this more equitable trading relationship. And so I ended up starting Nicaragua's first fair trade co-op in the summer of 1990, a group of 24 coffee farmers who signed up for this crazy idea that they could not only grow coffee, but also export their own coffee directly and jump over the middleman and go straight to the global market. And that was the beginning of a fantastic voyage for me. I led that co-op for 4 years. We grew it to 3,000 families. In my last year as manager of the co-op, we exported, I think, 150 containers, millions of pounds of coffee, and got our farmers a significantly higher price for their coffee, which in turn enabled them to invest in clean water and new, better housing and education and healthcare, and microloans for women entrepreneurs in the community, and reforestation, and all kinds of amazing investments in the community and in the community's capacity to be more successful as business people. And none of it thanks to any kind of well-intentioned international aid agency. None of it thanks to a government program, right? It was just all a result of farmers getting organized and developing their economies of scale and adding value to the product and going direct to the global market. It changed my life, Alexander. It changed my view of international development and the role of markets and of business. And, at that time, fair trade was big in Europe and growing fast. And here in the US, for whatever reason, we didn't really have a fair trade movement. There were a couple of points of light, a couple of pioneering companies, but there was no movement. There was no seal or certification. And so that's what led me to feel like I had a duty and a calling to come back to the US and start Fair Trade USA. And I always thought I'd go back to Nicaragua. I'm still thinking that, you know me as Paul, but when I rock the mustache, I'm Pablo, and my Nicaraguan hillbilly Spanish isn't too bad. So someday maybe I'll get back to the hills of Nicaragua where I belong. But in the meantime, what a ride to be a part of the fair trade movement here in the U.S.
I so hope that you're able to get back to Nicaragua, Paul. And we were talking beforehand about hopefully getting back to some international travel later this year.
Yeah,
And I know that's where you want to be, but I also want to reflect on just how much the fair trade movement has grown since then as well. I shared some numbers at the start of this, but I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about where it is today compared to when you started and what's to come with the
yeah,
fair trade movement.
yeah. Thanks for that. So let me start just by clarifying that fair trade is a philosophy, it's a movement, but it's also a standard. Like the organic standard. It's a 300-point checklist of labor, social, and environmental criteria that farmers and factory owners have to meet in order to pass their annual audit. Right. So we have a team of auditors around the globe that visit farms and factories every year and verify compliance with that standard. And then that enables those farms and factories to proudly wear the fair trade label. And on this side of the market, our market partners, now over 1,400 great companies, agree to pay a premium, right? So that is part of the essence of fair trade, is this notion that companies and consumers like us will pay a little bit more for a product that comes from a sustainable farm, or that comes from a more responsible factory. And so that is, in turn, that fair trade premium, as we call it, is what enables these amazing outcomes on the ground and in the community in terms of health and education and housing and so on. And so the role of Fair Trade USA, the organization that I started 23 years ago, is to develop that standard, to run the auditing and certification process, and then to engage the business community and consumers and to help build the movement. And so when I talk about where we are in fair trade, I'm really talking very specifically about the number of companies that have joined our cause and consumers that are now looking for that label. And I'm sure our audience has seen that fair trade label out there, but I'm gonna show a package of coffee. This is one of my favorite blends from Trader Joe's. There's the fair trade certified seal. You've probably all seen it out there. And that is what consumers are looking for, among other seals, right? Non-GMO and organic and regenerative, and so many seals out there that I think speak to different product attributes and that are helping us as consumers to shop more responsibly. You mentioned it a minute ago, Alexander. We now have 63% consumer awareness of that fair trade seal. We have again, over 1,400 companies. You mentioned some of the leading companies. We're very proud of our partnership with companies like Whole Foods and even companies like Walmart and Kroger, and mainstream grocers are now jumping in because they realize that sustainable supply chain is in the interest of the business, right? And that's really something that we very much share with the philosophy of conscious capitalism, this notion that our job as enlightened business people isn't to redistribute wealth, right? It's not about taking corporate profits and redistributing them to farmers and workers in the supply chain. That's not what fair trade is about. We're trying to create shared value, to create a scenario in which business gets a more sustainable supply chain. It gets a way to differentiate its brand and to sell more product. Consumers get to feel delighted about the products that are not only great tasting, but also that speak to our social or our environmental values. And of course, farmers and workers and their communities and their ecosystems get the benefit of a more equitable trade relationship and get to improve their lives. So that's our notion of fair trade. It's a shared value model that very much matches this philosophy at the core of conscious capitalism, right? Which is that there is a way for everyone to win. And that's what I think has drawn me, Alexander, to you and our community in conscious capitalism is this crazy notion that we have that actually more responsible business is better business. So fair trade, by the numbers, I mean, we're working with over 1 million families now in 62 countries, families who grow coffee and tea and all kinds of fresh produce and fish. And you mentioned Chobani. We launched our dairy standard last year. We're really excited about that. You'll recall that Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder of Chobani, and I sat on the stage at the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit a few years ago and talked about this thing that was coming, and now it's out there. And one of the hallmarks, as I mentioned, of fair trade is this premium. Last year, the total number of premium dollars that went back to farmers and workers was just over $120 million. And that is extraordinary to think that through our product purchases, one cup of coffee at a time, one banana at a time, last year, as conscious consumers, we were able to send over $120 million in a single year alone back to families at a time of great need, obviously with COVID. So I'm just so proud of all the companies that have joined our movement and all the consumers that make that flywheel possible by purchasing the product every day.
That is so inspiring, Paul. Really, thank you for all the work that you're doing and what you're really doing here. And I want to build on that because this is amazing work. And as you already pointed out, the alignment with conscious capitalism is very obvious to me. We believe opportunities created by capitalism are powerful tools to solve systemic problems, uplift communities, empower employees, and support efforts at both the local and global levels. And your philosophy with Fair Trade USA's theory of change very much aligns with that. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about your theory of change and how this model is creating that systemic change and being such a positive influence around the world.
Well, the theory of change is essentially that there are three key actors in our model that are needed to enable impact and positive outcomes for everyone in the community. And those three actors are obviously the business community, the consumer, and then the farmer or the worker that is part of the certified supply chain. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned a minute ago, if businesses see fair trade and things like it, sustainable supply chains, if you will, as in their own interest, then they're going to want to do more out of enlightened self-interest, right? And so businesses come to our community, come to our movement because they're looking to mitigate reputational risk. They don't want to be caught with a child labor scandal in their supply chain. Every community that I visit now is online. Farmers and workers all around the world, they all have cell phones. And so there really aren't any more secrets in the global supply chain. If a factory collapses and 1,000 workers die, as we saw in Bangladesh 6 years ago with Rana Plaza, the world is going to know about it. And so I think a lot of companies are concerned by not knowing what's in their supply chain. And so they want to mitigate reputational risk. They want more transparency and traceability in that supply chain in order to not have a scandal that splatters them. And also now, especially now, with all the disruption of supply chains, companies are looking at ways to secure and stabilize those supply chain relationships. And it stands to reason that, if you're paying your suppliers more within the context of a fair trade relationship, they tend to be more loyal. They tend to deliver. If they're low on inventory, they're going to prioritize those fair trade buyers. And so again, we see companies coming to our cause for that reason as well, for supply chain security. And then finally, companies realizing that this conscious consumer movement is a macro trend. It's not a fad, it's a macro trend. We get a glimpse of our collective future when we look at the numbers of Gen Z and millennial consumers. They've indexed very high in terms of their expectations of companies and companies' practices in terms of social and environmental responsibility. And so I think many companies are realizing that fair trade and things like it are ways to tap into that growing consumer movement and differentiate brand and sell more product. So that's a good thing. I mean, I'm unabashedly pro profit for companies, and I believe that fair trade and models like it can help companies be more successful and more profitable in the long term. So that's one leg of, if you will, the three-legged stool in our theory of change. The second leg is obviously the farmer and the worker, and they have to deliver high quality product. Our mission is all about alleviating poverty and promoting sustainable development. And that means enabling farmers who maybe in the past earned $3 or $4 a day on average to tap into the opportunities in the global market and be able to make a dramatically better living for themselves and keep their kids in school. And I've lived this. We talked about my journey in Nicaragua, and the advantage of being the OG Nicaraguan fair trader is that I know farmers. I have known farmers for now more than 30 years who joined in those early days of fair trade and whose kids went to college thanks to the scholarship fund that their co-op set up to help those kids stay in school. And now we're in the next generation, the grandkids, and they're clearly able to dream of a future that their grandparents never could have dreamed of. And for me, fair trade is all about hopes and dreams and self-confidence and being able to affect that generational change and to break those generational cycles of poverty that stymie the quality of life of so many kids still to this day around the world. So the farmers and workers are very much at the heart of our mission, but they have to kind of put in their do their share for fair trade too, right? If they deliver nasty tasting coffee, no company is going to want to pay a premium for that. So farmers and workers in our system are working hard to deliver high quality products, to deliver on time, to navigate those supply chain disruptions, like the closing of the port recently in Colombia that affected so many of our farmers. Like they're seeing the supply chain disruption on their side and doing their best to be great partners to the likes of Whole Foods and Walmart and other companies. So that's the second leg of the stool. It's not a handout. They have to deliver. And then the third leg of the stool is you and me, the consumer. And if we, quite simply, if consumers buy the fair trade product, then the model works for everyone, for the business community, for the farmers, for the workers, and so on. And if consumers don't buy it, then it doesn't work. And so a lot of our efforts are around activating consumers and getting the word out and making sure farmers have access to training programs so that they can learn how to deliver the highest quality product possible, which is part of delighting consumers. We have a fair trade universities program, so we're on hundreds of college campuses around the nation, engaging kind of a grassroots student movement around fair trade. It's really cool when students get organized and get fair trade products into their campus dining halls and can make a difference where they live, where they eat. So that's kind of our theory of change, that three-legged stool notion, where it's not just B2B, but also the consumer is a super meaningful part, Alexander, of our model, but also broadly speaking. I would suggest that in the conscious capitalist community, so many of my conversations with our peers in the community have focused on kind of that business-led responsibility. Like what can I do as a business owner to be more responsible, more conscious vis-a-vis my suppliers, my employees, my customers. And I think often we, as a community, miss the opportunity to think a little more deeply about how to engage the end consumer to reward us for these business models that we're developing that are more conscious and enlightened and that are better for the world. I think the consumer is ready. I think the consumer is ready, increasingly so, to reward companies for doing the right thing. And I've got a really interesting little pilot going that I'll tell you about in a minute if you want to hear about it, that kind of indicates the role that consumers can play in rewarding businesses and doing more.
Well, I was going to go in another direction, but Paul, I don't want
Yeah.
that to be a tease and not follow up on it with everyone else. So what's the pilot going on?
Well, we launched a pilot last year with Walmart and tomatoes. It's a pilot for Walmart in terms of volume, but it made Walmart in year one of that pilot the largest purchaser of fair trade tomatoes in the world because of their scale, their size. And so we're very proud of this program because we've been able to certify tomato farms in both Mexico and the US, bringing the benefits of fair trade in terms of worker safety and health measures and better wages and the fair trade premium. We've been able to bring that to tens of thousands of farm workers in the tomato sector in Mexico and the US. And I just got the dashboard on the first 3 quarters of performance, and I was kind of blown away because I think our listeners might share a bias that I think I probably had for a long time, which is conscious consumers don't shop at Walmart. Like they shop at Whole Foods or, maybe Trader Joe's or maybe the organic aisle of Kroger, but they don't go to Walmart. What a silly bias that was, because in our dashboard, what we've learned is that sales jumped 5% on these tomatoes after the fair trade label was applied. At Walmart, sales jumped. Walmart consumers are excited about this and rewarding the company by purchasing more. We also got other indicators that were really exciting to me in terms of on-farm progress. So one of the biggest challenges for business in the US right now, and for agriculture in particular, is worker retention. Farmers are struggling to retain their workforce, and there are labor shortages all over the place. And worker retention jumped from 63% to 85% last year on these fair trade certified farms. So what we're talking about, again, going back to the notion of shared value where everyone wins, the farm owner isn't getting the fair trade premium. That premium is going to the farm worker. But the farm owner is seeing labor retention going up, which means recruitment costs are going down, training costs are going down, and then their productivity and their quality indicators were up as well. This is all in 3 quarters of this pilot. So for me, this is kind of a dream come true in a couple of ways. One, because it's kind of proving the core hypothesis of fair trade and conscious capitalism, which is that doing the right thing can and will be good for business, all of the players. But it's also a dream come true because my vision is to mainstream fair trade and responsible supply chains and responsible sourcing. I want it to be accessible to every consumer, no matter where she shops. And if we can get the big mainstream retailers to get on board and show them that it's good for their business too, then I think we can truly impact the lives, not just of 1 million farmers, but 10 million and 100 million. And that's my dream.
Paul, thank you for sharing that. We actually hadn't discussed that pilot beforehand, so I love learning about that myself and being able to share that trend with conscious consumerism going on, because we could talk about supply chains. We've heard a lot about that already, and I think we'll get into it, but we're getting a lot of questions from the audience, so I want to
Cool.
turn it over to some of them now. And the first one is from Karen Salmon, actually the chair of our board, who is with us right
Karen.
now. And she says it's great to see you and is wondering how COVID and inflation is impacting farmers in fair trade. Is this helping? Is
Mm,
this hurting? What's that doing right now?
mm. Well, thanks for joining, Karen. And great question. COVID has been really hard for the farms and factories around the world that we're working with. It has led to labor shortages, for sure. In fact, I was on the phone last week with one of our tomato growers in Arizona, and he was sharing with me that 30 workers in his greenhouse are out with COVID, 60 workers in his packing plant are out with COVID. And I said, well, was it hard to find replacement labor, temporary replacement labor to kind of come in? And he said, what replacement labor? There isn't any. And I said, well, what does that mean? He said, we miss shipments. We miss shipments. So, you know, I feel for all those farmers out there that similarly are facing disruptions either to their workforce or to, you know, the truckers that are expected to come pick up product and can't. It's really hurting farmers here in the U.S. and around the world. We heard similar labor shortage complaints in Peru and in Colombia with our coffee farmers. So it's been tough. It's been really tough. And I'm just proud that our market partners, the buyers of those tomatoes and of that coffee, have not, you know, kind of thrown up their hands and said, well, you guys are unreliable, we're going to go somewhere else, right? Like everyone's feeling the pain, and there's a lot of understanding. I see a lot of understanding up and down the supply chain about these disruptions, and a lot of willingness on the part of our market partners, the companies that we work with, to stick with it and to continue to support these more responsible supply chains. So very proud there. You know, in terms of inflationary pressure, I think the main challenge that we've seen out there is just rising labor costs. And you know, what's ironic about that is that we want workers to earn more money. You know, we want workers to earn more money. The average coffee picker, someone who goes into the coffee harvest and picks coffee in Nicaragua, the average wage right now is $6 a day. We want workers to earn more money. We want workers to get a sustainable, you know, living wage. On the other hand, we aspire to realize that future within the context of sustainability and profitability for the businesses that they work at up and down the supply chain. So, you know, I think we're kind of two minds. The current context of labor out there is, yeah, okay, businesses are having to pay more for labor, so they're looking for ways to innovate and boost productivity. And I think that Walmart pilot was interesting because productivity numbers went up, retention went up, and productivity went up. So that's obviously, in the long term, the key to improving wages without necessarily exploding the business model of these companies. But yeah, suffice to say, it's a very challenging context, and I'm very proud of the businesses that we work with who are, you know, navigating these challenging moments with just a lot of integrity.
Thank you for all that, Paul. I can only imagine just how much how challenging it has been for them, and that for the support that you've been providing through COVID in this inflationary period. Vincent Buscarello has a question following up on your conscious consumerism point, wondering, how do we convince investors and management that authentic conscious consumerism is a macro trend with legs? Is there any evidence to point to, or anything that you would recommend that would help him and others make this case to investors and management?
Yeah, it's a great question. There is a growing body of literature. We've done some work with Harvard University. There's a lot of academic literature. There's, you know, in the business press, you'll also see reports and studies that have been done in very recent, you know, in the last year, and obviously predating COVID as well, around this phenomenon. We have commissioned research of our own with Natural Marketing Institute and other research houses. And I think, you know, if you just take a step back and you look at mainstream business leaders, you know, like Larry Fink, writing public letters talking about the rise of environmental, social, and governance monitoring and reporting. And we see mainstream companies really embracing this. Some maybe paying lip service to it because they feel like they have to. others with their whole hearts. But all of these are indicators. And then when we look at the rise of certifications and labels and the growth in market share, not just of fair trade, but of certified product that are speaking to these attributes, I think there's a really strong data-based case to be made for the macro trend. But the research is out there, and Alexander, I can have my marketing and research team pass along some things that we have to you if you want to make that available to the membership, because I totally get the concern about how do we make a data-based case to stakeholders. I mean, I'm in this role every day. When we pitch new companies, I don't pitch them on, hey, let's do fair trade together, it's the right thing to do. My pitch is consumers want it, it'll be good for business, right? So what's the data to support that case? I think we're all looking for more data and more evidence to present. So maybe I can pass along to you, Alexander, some things that we have.
That would be amazing, Paul. And part of the question was whether we'll send a recording of this out. We absolutely will. And if you can share those materials with us, we'll share that with
Absolutely.
everyone who signed up for this event as well.
Good deal.
So, not from the other side than just the data, Carol Facino would love to hear more about specific consumer messaging relating to what has worked. As a small fair trade social enterprise, she's struggling with this messaging and wants to engage people and keep them coming back.
Well, in our experience, the message has to be simple. And that's sometimes hard with fair trade, because the fair trade premium is managed by the community and they get to decide how to spend it. And so they spend their premiums on a whole range of different things that are really cool. And as I mentioned, in Nicaragua, we saw communities taking their fair trade premium and digging wells to bring clean drinking water into their villages for the first time, rather than waiting for some government agency to get around to doing it for them, right? They invested in health and education and women's rights and reforestation. And so in that sense, the fair trade story is very rich, because it comes out of all of these amazing stories at the community level of community level investments and hope and impact. And so that's good news from a storytelling perspective. It makes it hard sometimes to kind of like soundbite fair trade down. I think at the end of the day, we have to keep the headline message really simple. And one of the things that we've talked about is every purchase matters. When you buy this product, you get a very high quality product that improves lives and helps protect the environment. And that sounds oversimplified, but I think most consumers are on the go when they're shopping. They don't have a whole lot of time to read text on a package. So making the message simple and accessible is, I think, the way to go. But then beyond that, we are aiming toward a day in the not too distant future when we will have the ability for all of our market partners to have QR codes on their packages, and for consumers to be able to, once they take that home, if they want to dive deeper into the story, be able to do that and see the family that harvested their coffee, and read the story of those kids that are in school, thanks in part to that purchase. So I think there's a role for both making the message simple and easy, but then also creating the ability through technology to have a very rich storytelling platform that can engage those consumers that want to dive in deeper. And in our experience, there's probably 10% of the total fair trade consumer community, if you will, that actively take the time to research and to read the stories, and they become our brand ambassadors. They go out and they evangelize for the cause, and they organize, fair trade groups on campus, and they're posting online. And so, especially for those brand ambassadors, for those ambassadors of more responsible products, I think making the story available in all its richness is going to be very strategic. And so we're aiming for that right now in our organization.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. And Mario Hernandez is wondering, how hard is it to work with this philosophy with international producers? What are the main challenges you run into being such a global philosophy and organization?
Well, we started international. We only started working with farms here in the U.S. 5 years ago, and so we've been global for 23 years. And there are challenges, of course, in terms of language. Um, there are challenges in terms of the regulatory environment in a lot of these countries. But what has worked for us is to really build on the foundation of international trade that our market partners have already developed. And so, Green Mountain Coffee, our largest coffee partner, they already had trading relationships with Colombia, with Peru, with Guatemala, with Ethiopia. And so it was pretty easy for us then to kind of follow their supply chain back down to the field and engage those farmers and get them certified if they weren't already, and then help to strengthen an existing relationship and to support that relationship. And by doing that, we learned of many of the needs that those groups of farmers had, and we're able to then bring in other partners, NGOs, to support, for example, on training, and to help those farmers continue to perform and to overcome some of the obstacles in their markets, and to be able to perform as very successful international entrepreneurs. So it is a far-flung global supply chain that we work in, but frankly, it doesn't feel that remote to me on most days. I'm just a WhatsApp call away from someone in Ethiopia or Indonesia or Guatemala.
Paul, that's great. Thank you. And we're getting close to the end of our time. I want to respect your time. So I'm going to take the prerogative with the last question and ask, what tips do you have for conscious businesses and conscious consumers that want to ensure they're contributing to ethical and responsible practices?
Well, as consumers, we can all make a difference with our purchases. And for me, it starts with mindfulness. When we drink that cup of coffee in the morning, we usually don't think about the farmer and her family that live at the bottom of the cup. So think about the farmer at the bottom of the cup. Think about the people who made our clothes or who harvested our bananas. For me, it starts with that. It starts with a process of just remembering that all of these things, all of these products that we eat and wear and enjoy were grown by humans just like us, who live in communities that may be struggling, and yet they still dream of a better life for their kids too. And so we can make a difference with every purchase. And as you know, Alexander, corporate America is very responsive to demand. And if they feel like the tomatoes are selling 5% more this quarter than last quarter, they're going to lean in and do more. And so that's one thing that each and every one of us can do in our kind of role as consumers. As business leaders, we have perhaps even more power and influence and ability to change lives and protect the environment. And I think starting with the supply chain, so many of our conscious capitalist business leaders are so thoughtful about their employees and how they run their business. And suppliers are arguably harder, a harder challenge to tackle, especially if it's a global supply chain, as the earlier question pointed to. A global supply chain isn't always super easy to tackle and to gain transparency and traceability. But I think that's the challenge as business leaders, to lean into transparency and traceability in our supply chain. Simply to ask the question of our suppliers, can you give me a report on the farms or on the factories that we're sourcing from, and can we start to have the conversation about conditions? I recently had a conversation with someone who has a furniture brand, and she is very passionate about sustainability in other parts of her life, but she actually didn't know which factories her furniture was coming from, and that was curious to me. And we had a conversation without judgment or criticism. I just asked a few questions, and she, I think, came around to realizing that that's not okay, indefinitely. And that there is a time for all of us to ask the question, where are these products coming from? And if, as business leaders, we can get more transparency, that's the first step. Just knowing where stuff is coming from and asking the question, what are the conditions like in that factory? What are the conditions like on that farm? That starts a process that is pretty definitive, and it leads to, maybe it leads to certification like fair trade, or maybe it just leads to something that we all can implement in our own businesses, our own code of conduct. Many companies have codes of conduct, and they have kind of supplier engagement rules that they have subscribed to. B Corp and other organizations are tackling this issue from their direction. I know many of the people in our community are fans of B Corp. So, fair trade is just one of many arrows in your quiver, that can help make your business more sustainable and responsible from a supply chain perspective. But for me, Alexandra, it just starts with a simple question: where did these things come from, and how can we make conditions better?
Well, on that inspiring note, Paul, I want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, for taking the time to join us as always, and for being a part of the conscious capitalism community. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. If you can please fill out the survey in the chat box that Kim Todd has shared, we'd love to get your feedback to keep offering incredible virtual gatherings going forward. And we will be following up with the recording and resources from Fair Trade USA. And with that, I'll just say, Paul, thank you again. Really appreciate you joining us. I'm looking forward to talking with everyone again soon.
Alexander, thank you so much for having me today. It's such an honor and an inspiration to be a part of this community and to be your friend. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I'm so proud of what our community has done, and looking forward to seeing what we do going forward. So thanks to everyone for coming today.
Hear, hear, Paul. I'm excited for everything coming up with us. All right. Take care. Talk to you
Take
soon.
good care.